sort of start this story, or to talk about a little bit of where it's coming from. The problem, I think, that we're identifying in the broader society is a problem that is not unique to Ireland, but it's a problem that is summarized in the phrase a democratic deficit. Decisions are being made at a European level, at an Ireland level, at a regional level, at a local level, that do not seem to involve a lot of people who are in fact affected by those decisions. And I think we in Ireland particularly are very aware of this particular problem, given what happened since 2008 with the crash, the rescue of the banks, the bailout, and all the rest of it. And I think most Irish people would feel that a large number of decisions were made that affected us deeply, that had a huge impact on our lives and our standard of living and our priorities and what we could do and couldn't do, and yet we had little or no say in shaping those decisions. And that's just one example. Now, I think the interesting thing to reflect on is maybe that modern democracy is following a particular type of participation model. And it's a participation model that was valid a century ago. If you think back, this is 2014, think back 1914, a century ago, the world of John Redmond and Home Rule, and just before the start of the Great War, as it was called at the time. And at that time, we had a democratic system in which people were elected in a particular way and for a particular period of time, and we dealt with it in a particular way because travel was slow, very slow. Communication was very difficult and very slow. So the result was that we tended to elect people. The most systems elected people, sent them off for a number of years. The people did whatever they did in Parliament or wherever the decisions were made. And they came back some years later, and if we thought they'd done a good job, we re-elected them, and if not, we elected somebody else to replace them. However, a century later, travel is very easy. Much swifter, obviously, but more importantly, even communication is instant. It's only a couple of weeks since there was billions of people literally all over the world sitting watching the same event live in the World Cup final, we'll say, from Brazil. So in a world where communication is so fast and travel is so easy, why are we sticking with a traditional approach to actually decision making? And I think there's a lot of people are asking these kinds of questions today. One of the qualifications or one of the adjustments I think that we need to make is to recognize that modern democracy requires civil society to be a part of the decision making process. It requires the engagement of community and voluntary organizations, social inclusion organizations, environmental organizations, and I would argue very strongly with that without the participation of civil society, you can't run a modern democracy. So it's important to engage these organizations. And I think that's kind of more and more being recognized in more places. It mightn't always be obvious, and there are certainly governments that don't see how important it is or how essential it is. But given that, I think most people would begin to realize at least that it's important today, there is a challenge. And the challenge is to develop effective processes for real engagement. Now, I think the reality is that most areas have lots of organizations, large organizations, very small organizations, local organizations, county organizations, regional, national, all sorts of different types of organizations. But I think most people would realize that also from the practice that if you look at what's there, there's a low level of engagement much of the time, that a lot of people might be signed up, but they aren't all that active maybe. And very often there's a complaint that it's the same small number of people and the same small number of organizations that seem to be represented all the time in any arena where decisions are actually made, or where the community and voluntary sector or the environmental sector or the social inclusion sector are to be represented. The core proposal in the report that we did was to set up in every local authority a public participation network. Now, a public participation network, as understood here, is open to all organizations, community organizations, volunteer organizations, social inclusion organizations, environmental organizations. They're all part of this. And they all they self-declare themselves into social inclusion or voluntary or environmental. There's one qualification on that. If they're environmental, they have to have the okay of the environmental pillar. It isn't that the environmental pillar is insisting that only organizations who are members are to be okayed, but that they have to be recognized as genuine environmental organizations. Now, one of the things that has happened is that the government has accepted this particular proposal and sees these public participation networks as the main conduit for communication between local authorities and organizations in the new dispensation, in the new structures that they have put into place. Now, the structure of the PPNs, it's structured both at a municipal district level and at a county level. So in every municipal district, all the organizations under the various headings that we've talked about or mentioned, they all come together if they wish to. Nobody's forcing them to do it. But I think most people would think it would be a good idea if they did. And they create the PPN at a municipal district level. Now, they also, then all the organizations within the county are welcome to join the county PPN, to register for it and be part of it. Now, as long as the organization is a real organization, they won't be excluded or can't be excluded from this process. Now, one of the things to make this work effectively, it's critical that there be a good communications. And for that purpose, the PPN would have a secretariat. And the secretariat, the way we recommend it, and the guidelines the government has issued support this, although, again, variations are possible. But what we're talking about is that each municipal district would choose one person with a sub. If they can't go, then a sub goes with them, and they go and they become part of the secretariat. So, for example, in Kilkenny, there are 4 municipal districts. So 4 members of the secretariat would be chosen, one each from the municipal districts, and they would have 4 subs to fill in for them if they're not there. Now, at the county level, we said that organizations are expected to declare themselves to be either social inclusion or environment or community stroke voluntary. You can't be in more than one of these. Each of those at a county level, all the organizations, all the social inclusion organizations elect 2 people to be part of the secretariat. The environmental organizations elect 2 people to be part of the secretariat, and the other community and voluntary organizations, they elect 2 people. So that gives you 6 plus 4, 10 people on the secretariat in Kilkenny, as an example. Okay. Now they basically are central. They are central to the communications process, and we'll come back to that in a little while, just in terms of how it actually works in practice. However, I think it's important, first of all, to make the point that the focus of these PPNs, both at a municipal level and at a county level, is the well-being of this and future generations. And what we recommended in the report was that the first item on their agenda when they come together originally is the drawing up of a statement of well-being for the area that they're covering, whether that's the municipal district or whether it's the county. Now, we don't expect that this is a huge, mighty document, but basically, even if a couple of pages that sets out what they consider to be the essential components of well-being for the area that we're talking about for this and future generations. And Charles was talking about some of the key kinds of elements of that in his presentation earlier on. Now, in terms of this kind of structure, a question then might be, is there anything that's unique in it? And I'd suggest that there's one. And this is the linkage groups idea. You might get a better name for this. Linkage groups might not be the best our most felicitous title for these things, but let me explain what they are by basically telling you how it works in practice. We'll say that there are, first of all, to state the obvious, there are many county committees on which there are different representatives from different sectors and so on. And there very often then are seats for community or social inclusion or environmental organizations or whatever. There are a number of seats available in these arenas. There are strategic policy committees at a county level and so on. There's one structure that is dealt with differently, and that is the LCDC, the Local Community Development Committee. I'll come back to that in a moment. But first of all, take the ordinary kind of, if I would describe them as that, the ordinary county committee or strategic policy committee or whatever. If there are seats available in one of these, the procedure is as follows. Say we're talking about childcare, for example. There might be a childcare committee and there's two seats available. What would happen would be that the county council would contact the PPN and let them know that there are 2 seats available on a committee, the childcare committee, for the PPN. The PPN then, Secretariat, would notify all organizations in the PPN that these positions were available. They would organize a meeting. The Secretariat would organize a meeting, date, place, venue, all this kind of time would be sent out to all the organizations in the PPN. And then what they would do is they would ask the organizations who were stakeholders, who were genuinely involved with that issue, to come together and discuss. And what they would do, once they come together, they form the linkage group for the PPN on that issue. So the issue in this case happens to be childcare. And it is that group that chooses the people to represent the PPN and chooses 2 people to represent them on the County Childcare Committee. But they have, before they choose, there's a couple of things have to be agreed. They have to agree that whoever decides to run and is elected has to agree a number of things. First of all, that they are going to represent the views of all organizations in the PPN and not in the linkage group, as in this case, and not just their own organization or still just their own views. They're there to represent all organizations, and that's very important, particularly even if there's disagreement. They have to live with that and bring that into the discussions in the arena that they're engaged with. The second thing they have to agree to in advance of being elected is that they have to report back all the time to the linkage group and meet with the linkage group. So we have one of the, in the report that we published, there's a little, one of the appendices, there's a short little outline there of how to do a report on from each meeting of this kind. And that's circulated to all people in the linkage group. It's also available on the website so that anybody else can read it as well. But the idea would be that what happens in a meeting is made available to all the people in the linkage group, and they then discuss how to proceed from there, and they discuss the agenda for the next meeting, and they basically give the instructions to the people who are representing them to go off and represent them and the positions to take and so on. And the idea then is basically that because the people are involved in this issue themselves, they are stakeholders, we'll say, as I was giving the example of childcare, that because they are the stakeholders, they want to stay in touch with the issue, they will in fact remain engaged. If the person elected does not fulfill the conditions, then that person would be removed, and that would be essential as well. This would be the same then for any other committee or any other, the strategic policy committees on the council, whatever else is put in place, with the exception of the LCDC, the Local Community Development Committee. This is a new structure that has been created as part of the reform of local government, and it will contain a majority of people who are not in the local authority or in the statutory sector. Now, most counties are talking in terms of a 15-member LCDC, 8 members who are not, who are outside, if you like, and 7 who are either local councillors or council itself or statutory bodies. Now, of the 8 members from outside that are to be chosen, 5 are chosen by the PPN. 2 of those 5 are chosen by the social inclusion strand, the organizations who are there. 2 are chosen by the community voluntary, who are not social inclusion, and the 1 is chosen by the environmental organizations. Our proposal had been that they be 2-2-2, but the government didn't accept that. They said 2-2-1. Now, those 5 then would be elected onto the LCDC, and they would operate in the same way, communicating back with their own constituency and staying in touch with each other, of course, as well as with the members of their own constituency. So I think this provides, we would argue this provides an opportunity. It's very simple outline of it right now, but at least we think it provides an opportunity for all voices to be heard, including yours. And it will hopefully engage more people than has been the situation in the past, but also maintain the engagement of organizations in an active way, and lead to real communication and engagement. The timeline is straightforward enough. The timeline that was agreed originally was that all PPNs in the country were to be in place by the end of May. But the problem with that was that the work wasn't done to put them into place, so that's rolling out now. Guidelines have gone out to all and directives to all county councils to put the PPNs in place and to do it immediately. And a national reference group has been established, which will stay in place until the end of the year, to basically deal with any issues that are involved in the establishment of PPNs in any county, and also to deal with questions that arise and answer any questions that counties may have in that. And the quotation we up there from Edmund Burke is one I like myself and I use a lot. All that's necessary for the triumph of evil is that good people do nothing. Nothing happens unless somebody does something. So in this context, it's very important for people to actually engage and be there. Now, in terms of what this might look like on a chart, that's a chart that's taken from the actual report, but it's in the document. If you look at it, it's in the document that you got when you arrived this evening, and you might take a look at it. We take a look at it for a minute. What you're looking at here are municipal districts. There would be 4 of these in Kilkenny, and each of them has a PPN at a municipal district. The local community, social inclusion and environment organizations make up those PPNs. And those PPNs each elect somebody to go to the Secretariat to represent them in the Secretariat with a sub as well. But that, not just that, then all of these organizations can also become part of the County Public Participation Network. And I see these got lost here. This is because this is an Apple Mac and it lost out some of these things. But anyway, the community is here, but the social inclusion and the environment should be there in those other circles as well. And at the county level, these 3 groups, strands, colleges, whatever you want, each elect their people for the local community development committee. And then they also elect people for the strategic policy committees and set up linkage groups for that purpose and other local government bodies as well. And they maintain a dialogue on an ongoing basis at that level.